These are notes 6.0, lesson 1, day 2. We'll call this part 1. I'm going to split up day 2 into 2 videos. So here's the first part where we're going to be changing percents to decimals and to fractions. We're going to be converting between all three. And so I gave you a whole list of rules up here at the top that we're going to be using as we go through this. And so I'll talk about them whenever we get to them. So our first one, I give you 16%. And so we're going to have to change this percent to a decimal and to a fraction. So we're going to start with our first rule right here, percent to a decimal. In order to change that, we move the decimal places 2 places to the left. Well, the first thing we have to figure out in a percent, where is our decimal since it's not here? Well, we've learned before, if our decimal's not there, it's always just behind our last number. And so our rule is to move our decimal places 2 to the left. So that means my decimal is going to be 0.16. If you want to put a 0 in front of your decimal, that's fine. If you leave it off, that's also fine. Just make sure I can clearly tell that your decimal point is there. So now we need to change to a fraction or a mixed number. And so we have to do that from our decimal. We'll do a decimal to a fraction. So it says the place value that the decimal ends in, so we talked about place value at the beginning of the notes yesterday, tells the denominator, reduce if possible. So it ends in this place value, which on the front, we said that place value is the hundredths place. So that means my denominator is going to be 100. My numerator is just going to be this point right here. It's going to be 16. Now it says reduce if possible. We know both of these can be divided by something. First of all, we know they're both even, so they're divisible by 2. But some of you might have thought automatically these are both divisible by 4. If you divide by 4 right away, you'll immediately get the simplest terms. But if you decide to divide by 2, we'll divide both by 2, and we would get 8 over 50. Well, I would notice again these are both even, so I'd have to divide by 2 over 2 again to get 4 over 25. Or you could have just divided by 4 over 4 to begin with, and you still would have gotten 4 over 25. So let's go to our second one. I give you the decimal 1.05. So let's change our decimal to a percent first. And so it says move the decimal 2 places to the right. So I already give you the decimal. All we have to do is move it 2 to the right. So that's going to give me 105%. Now we need to change our decimal to a fraction. Well, first of all, we could actually make this a mixed number since this is 1 point something. So this is going to be 1 as our whole number, and then we make our fraction. Well, we notice our last number here is a 5, and it is in the hundredths place, which means, like the last one, my denominator is 100. Our numerator is just 5. You could have written 0.5, but it's the same thing as 5. Now I want you to notice this can be simplified. We can divide both of these numbers by 5. So we'll divide by 5 over 5. Make sure you rewrite your whole number here. So this is still going to be 1, and then we know 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. Now if you don't know what 100 divided by 5 is, go off to the side and do some long division. So we know 5 goes into 10 twice, and then 5 goes into 0 0 times, and that's going to give us 20. Our third one here, I give you this fraction, 4/5. So we're going to change this both to a percent and to a decimal. And so actually we have to change it to a decimal first. We cannot go straight to a percent. So in order to change a fraction into a decimal, we just divide. We will have to do some long division here. Okay, so we will do 4 divided by 5. Well, we obviously know 5 does not go into 4. That's not a possibility. So we need to put a decimal behind the 4 and a 0 behind it. Now when we draw a decimal here, we also need to put a decimal on top. And then if I do 40 divided by 5, I get 8. 8 times 5 is perfectly 40. I have nothing left, so my decimal is going to be 0.8. Now that we have our decimal, we can change it to a percent. And so our rule again is to move the decimal 2 places to the right. So I'll move it 1, 2. Well, since I don't have a number here, all we have to do is put in a 0. So if I have 0.8, I move it 2 to the right. I just put a 0 here, and it's going to be 80%. Okay, so why don't you try 4% on your own? So I want you to pause the video right now, and I want you to do 4% on your own. I want you to make sure you show me all the work to find it as a decimal and a fraction. When you're finished, you can unpause the video. So to change 4% to a decimal, we move our decimal twice to the left. So that's going to give me 0.04 as my decimal. And then to change that to a fraction, we see 4 is in our hundreds place. So we put 100 as our denominator, and we put 4 on the top. Both of these are divisible by 4. You could have done 2 and 2 twice. And this is going to give me 1/25. And again, if you don't know what 100 divided by 4 is, you come over here to the side and do your long division for it. We get 8 here, and then 20, and we know that goes in there 5 times. Now let's take a look at 2.74, I'm sorry. So again, I want you guys to pause your video, and I want you to figure out the percent and fraction. And when you're done, unpause the video. So to change our decimal to a percent, we move our decimal place 2 to the right. So this is 274%. Then to change it to a fraction, we have a whole number. Our last digit is in the hundreds place, so our denominator is 100. And then we take our decimal point here, 74, and we put that in the numerator. Both of these are divisible by 2. So we get 2. 100 divided by 2 is 50. If you don't know what 74 divided by 2 is, do it over here on the side. So we know it goes in 3 times. It gives me a 6 and 14, so this is 37. Okay, let's look at 1/16. Okay, so I want to do this one with you guys because our decimal is going to get a little bit complicated here. Okay, but in order to change a fraction to a decimal, again, remember, we need to do long division. And so we have to do 1 divided by 16. Well, we know 16 doesn't go into 1, so we put a decimal, which means we put a decimal on the top, and we put a 0. Well, we know 16 still doesn't go into 10, so we put a 0 on top and we add another 0. 16 is going to go into 100 6 times. Okay, so if you don't know what 6 times 16 is, or you don't know how many times it goes into 100, just keep multiplying out 16 until you exceed 100. And so that's when you know you need to stop. So 16, and actually to give us a little more room, let's jump down here to the bottom. I'm going to rewrite this really fast. So we're not going to have enough room up there to work. So we have 0.06. So 6 times 16 is going to give me 96. And so that gives me a remainder of 4 here. So I need to put another 0, which means I'm going to drop a 0 here. So 16 goes into 40 twice. 2 times 16 gives me 32. So I'm left with 8. And again, I drop down another 0. 16 goes perfectly into 85 times. So the decimal I get here is going to be 0.0625. And then once we have our decimal, we can easily change it to a percent just by moving our decimal 2 to the right to give me 6.25%. Okay. 1.6, you guys can change that on your own very quickly. Again, pause it and then double check. So we know to change it to a percent, we move it twice to the right. So this is 160%. And then to change this to a fraction, we know we have a whole number. And then 6 is actually in the tens place. So our denominator is 10 with 6 as our numerator. Both of these are divisible by 2. So I get 1 and 3/5. And then our last one here, 1/6. So again, to change our fraction to a decimal, we need to divide. So we're going to do it down here to give ourselves some room. We have 1 divided by 6. So we know 6 does not go into 1, so we put a decimal and then add a 0. We know 6 goes into 10 one time. Okay, so that doesn't come out evenly, so we add another 0. 6 goes into 40 6 times, because 6 times 6 is 36. We're left with a 4. Bring down another 0. But we know that 6 goes into 46 times, which is 36. That gives me a 4 again. And if you guys think about it, we know this is going to continue to happen over and over and over again. We're going to keep getting 6's up here. So rather than continuing to write this decimal, remember we can write this as 0.16 repeating. Just make sure your repeating bar is only over the 6, because 6 is the only thing that's repeating. The 1 is not. So now we have our decimal, we can change it to our percent. So we know change a decimal to a percent, we move it twice to the right. But this is not just 16%, because we know we actually have another number after our 6. So let me rewrite this here. The number we have after our 6 is another 6. So we're actually going to write this as 16.6 repeating percent. So once you have this video done, go ahead and go to the day 2 part 2 video.